With Summer League having wrapped up and most of the biggest trades and acquisitions having come and gone, we've officially entered the darkest part of the year for basketball fans, the offseason. And while this desperate search for basketball has led to a variety of different conversations, ranging from next season's predictions to your typical terrible WNBA Twitter take, for me, this has been a great time to go back and reflect on this past season and a few of the postseason matchups that we got to watch unfold. And at the top of the list of interesting series for me was the Thunder's first round matchup with the Memphis Grizzlies. Because while at a glance there isn't a ton to take away from a historic 1 seed dismantling an injured play-in team, the final game of the series was pretty eye-opening for me with regards to the play of one Jaren Jackson Jr. Especially with him being flagged as a dream target for my Knicks earlier in the offseason, his struggles throughout the series and in Game 4 specifically not only highlighted a few of the known flaws in his game, like his foul tendency, but also helped underscore how forced versatility and perimeter-centric coaching can really blow up in an organization's face at a crucial time. So let's look at Jaren Jackson Jr., his journey leading up to that Game 4 performance, and uncover the NBA's illusion of versatility. In order to fully understand Jackson Jr.'s struggles, we're gonna have to flash back to his time as a prospect coming out of Michigan State. Because for as much as he's improved as a player throughout his pro career, he's had the same holes in his game since the time before he entered the league. Jackson was a 6'11 center prospect coming out of Michigan State for Tom Izzo in the loaded 2018 draft, where he was occupying an interesting position as a project player who had one of the more puzzling offensive reputations we've seen in recent years. At a glance, his 10.9 points per game on 51.3% from the field and 39.6% from three while taking 2.7 threes a game was top 5 material, especially when you factor in that the 18-year-old also led the Big Ten Conference in blocks, sending back on average 3 shots a game. But a little added context to these stats begins to reveal the small cracks in his game that would set him up for a unique player development path through his time in the NBA. Much of Jackson Jr.'s offense came on spot-up jumpers on the perimeter, where he shot 41.2% on non-dribble jumpers, according to stats from Bleacher Report. But despite what appeared to be a dominant inside game where he scored 1.226 points per possession, he only shot 54.2% around the basket, a number that was noted by scouts but ultimately not raised as a genuine issue when considering his age, floor stretching, and defensive capabilities. Interestingly enough though, as we track his post-scoring progression in the way that his role has evolved in Memphis through the addition of Ja Morant and the growth of his importance in the offensive attack, time and time again, we'll see that it'll come back to this fundamental aspect of his game not being polished enough or prevalent enough to help Memphis when it matters most. Regardless, following the 2018 draft where he went 4th to Memphis, Jackson Jr. was joining the Grizzlies at an interesting time, as he was clearly being looked at as the first piece of a new, youthful core that they would invest in, but he was simultaneously surrounded by the relics of the grit and grind era, with Marc Gasol and Mike Conley being the centerpieces on a team coached by J.B. Bickerstaff. And this season would mark a turning point for the franchise. Triple J would have a dominant rookie campaign, with his averages of 13.8 points and 1.4 blocks being enough to excite many a Memphis fan who had heard of his two-way potential but weren't fully sold on his game. Through this season, Jackson Jr. would finish in the 74th percentile of all bigs in the league in rim field goal percentage, while also knocking down 40% of his non-corner three-point attempts, which was good enough to place him in the 85th percentile amongst all bigs. This is on top of his defensive dominance, where he ranked in the 88th and 84th percentile respectively of block and steal percentage. But what's interesting to note here is that during this season, Memphis ranked 9th in the league in total post-up possessions per game at 8.3. And in this number, while Marc Gasol was receiving the most paint touches at that center spot with 4.1 a game, Jackson Jr. was second on the team behind him at 3.3, with his 24.8% post-up frequency and 0.93 points per possession, actually putting him ahead of Gasol in both categories, and with better paint scoring prowess than was advertised on top of his floor stretching and defensive prowess. Jaren Jackson's rookie season can act as a sign of what a balanced offensive attack could do for his development as a metaphorical jack of all trades. But by the end of his rookie year, Memphis would fully move on from the grit and grind era and embrace an offensive approach that would slowly move Jaren away from this balanced diet into an offensive weapon more representative of the modern day hunt for versatility. On February 7th, 2019, Memphis would send Marc Gasol to the Raptors, followed by the drafting of Ja Morant and the trading of Mike Conley, along with the hiring of a more pace and space, three-point-minded coach in Taylor Jenkins, to jumpstart a new era for Jackson Jr. and all of Memphis basketball. And in the following season, Memphis would certainly see a change. And while their win total wouldn't reflect it, they jumped to 6th in the league in pace, playing a faster, more exciting brand of basketball that paradoxically saw them jump in paint point production while not seeing their young big man reap any statistical benefits from this increased inside attack. Over this season, his scoring would jump to 17.4 points a game and 1.6 blocks on 46.9% from the field and 39.4% from three on 6.5 attempts a game, which was good to place him in the 87th percentile of both total three-point shots and non-corner three-point shots a game. All positive signs of development, particularly as it related to his floor stretching capabilities with such a paint-dependent point guard like Ja Morant and a center like Jonas Valanciunas. But Jackson would also see his post touches and frequency drop significantly on account of Memphis's new attack, going down to 2.1 post-up possessions a game and a 12.5% frequency, where he only scored 0.84 points per possession to place him in the 33rd percentile of all post scorers. This shift in his offensive attack from his rookie year to his second season may be insignificant at a glance, but it's really representative of how Memphis has unintentionally taken to dealing with players who can be classified as quote-unquote jacks of all trades, where the aspiration to create a versatile, do-it-all big that can be a mismatch offensively and defensively is really just a cover for creating a floor spacing big who can block shots. And understand that this isn't inherently a bad thing or something that I'm even opposed to, but as his career unfolds and Memphis's postseason troubles begin to show, the unintended downsides of this approach will become increasingly clear. But Jackson Jr. would eventually tear his left meniscus, taking him out for the remainder of the 2020 season and essentially the totality of the 2020-21 season. And as a result, despite Memphis and Jackson's first postseason appearance, there's not much to really say about it on account of him only playing in 11 games in 2021. But with them starting the 21-22 season fully healthy and having had their first taste of postseason success, Memphis entered this year having fully recommitted to their pace and space approach, with Jackson's role as a roaming, rangy, floor-stretching four being even more cemented behind the 4-year, $104 million contract he inked prior to the season. Through the year, as a member of the scorching second-seeded Grizzlies, while his scoring averages would drop slightly to 16.3 points a game, for the first time in his career, he'd lead the league in blocks at 2.3 a game while shooting 41.5% from the field. We should also note that through this season, he'd also take the most three-point shots of his career at 401 attempts on the season, while also shooting his lowest mark for a full year at just 31.9%. Interestingly, his post-scoring touches and approach would stay roughly the same, but his post-scoring efficiency would take a step up, with him developing a serviceable hook shot that he could go to in the post, connecting on 49% of his attempts and giving us a glimpse at a potential offensive wrinkle for Jackson Jr. that could become a major factor down the line. And to Memphis's credit, in the postseason it certainly did, as over the course of the 2022 playoffs, Jackson Jr. found himself with an 11.6% post-up frequency, scoring 1.17 points per possession, and punishing mismatches in what was one of the first true signs of traditional big man skill development in his career. And despite a three-point heavy approach to the season, Jaren ended a breakout year in 21-22 with a strong foundation of what a balanced attack both inside and out could look like in the new run-and-gun, pace-and-space era for the Grizzlies. And in the following season, while Memphis would take a slight step back in their record, Jackson Jr. would again have his best individual season to date, as he'd not only average career highs in points, blocks, and rebounds, but he'd make his first All-Star appearance along with capturing his first DPOY and a back-to-back all-defensive team selection. From an ideal development standpoint, this year would mark the closest that Memphis had ever gotten to seeing their dream of Jackson Jr. actualized, with his defensive impact forcing opponents to score a whopping 5.5 points less per 100 possessions with him on the floor, along with them having a 4% lower effective field goal percentage. And his shot chart reflected the ideal vision of a modern-day four, with his production either being directly at the rim or behind the three-point line with an above-the-break tray, taking these shots with a 34.2 and 54.7% frequency respectively, according to B-Ball Index. A lot of his offense this season came from him truly getting to lean into that small forward role, running a stretch 4 position next to Steven Adams or one of Memphis's other traditional bigs that could cover up for his weaknesses in the traditional center skills like rebounding and post scoring, while simultaneously letting Jaren attack from the perimeter against slower-footed bigs or three men that were too small to stop him from bullying his way to the cup. However, though his post-up frequency would raise slightly this year, over the next 2 seasons, as Jaren was forced to play without Ja and take on more of a shot creator role, we'd see that his unique role in Memphis had created one of the stranger offensive approaches in recent memory. To begin the 23-24 season, with Ja serving his 25-game suspension, Jackson Jr. saw a massive jump in his usage rate from 22.1 to a career-high 29%. And with this increase came a mixed bag of positives and negatives, like a surprising jump in his assist-to-usage ratio to a 13.3%, up from the 4.8 that he'd held the previous year. But there was also a major drop in center minutes for him this year, only spending 26% of his time on the court at this spot, with a staggering 70% of his time being dedicated to him having to fill the same power forward spot. And more puzzling was the drop in post and paint touches that Jackson Jr. had, with his post-up frequency dropping to a career-low 9.5% frequency, virtually erasing this facet of his game from the offense, instead opting for perimeter isolations or spot-up possessions where he had a 14.7 and whopping 25.3% frequency respectively. This approach to a season that was ruined by injuries is pretty interesting when put into context with what's to come for Memphis, because it both underscores their commitment to creating a four for the future, but also highlights how unimportant they believed his paint game to be, especially when it came to, quote, attacking mismatches, as he often only opted to seek to challenge these mismatches from the perimeter while not addressing a documented rudimentary back to the basket game. And granted, rudimentary may be a harsh way of describing it, but Jackson Jr.'s 23-24 season is probably the biggest piece of evidence when examining how their final 2 games played out against the Thunder in the 24-25 playoffs. Through the 24-25 regular season though, to Memphis and Jackson Jr.'s credit, he did keep up his high-level output, with his scoring, rebounding, and field goal percentage all holding steady and even increasing behind the three-point line. And moreover, the vision for Jackson Jr. as a positionless floor spacer in the wider, floor positioning-based offensive approach that the Grizzlies' offense had taken this year did look pretty good at times. But as we all saw in their opening round against the Thunder, a mid-season coaching shakeup paired with an injury to Ja all came together to expose the fatal flaw to Jackson Jr.'s development, as he found himself unable to score, create an advantage out of, or even properly get position in the post against a team of smaller Thunder wings with established rim protection on the weak side. This series, which saw Jackson Jr. regress to on-court production we hadn't seen since his rookie year, was the subject of much scrutiny on social media. And for as many valid reasons for Jackson's poor play, like Ja's injury, the Thunder's historic post defense that was able to make Jokic look bad at times, or the perimeter freelance offensive attack that's further slashed his post-up opportunities, ultimately, the end result just emphasizes the main issue with the modern day understanding of versatility for big men. Jackson's whole career has been spent with him being molded in the image of a super wing who could punish mismatches and defend the rim at a high level without giving up size or being susceptible to bruising big men from previous eras. But this pursuit quickly devolved into perimeter spacing and off-the-dribble attacks without much more substance or any other wrinkles to his game. And while he has been able to develop a bit of a baby hook and some semblance of a post touch, in the season where he was viewed as the offensive focal point with free, unlimited reps to develop, we saw as this aspect of his game was phased out more than ever before, with Grizzlies brass in the front office choosing to force him closer to being a 3 than a 4 who had the ability to perform as a power forward or traditional 5. And though it seems that it's become tradition at this point on the channel to complain about versatility as a buzzword, in an era where Jackson is just one of a handful of bigs that's filling this similar role, with the inverted pick and rolls of Evan Mobley or Jokic being prime examples, it feels like Triple J's attention to this aspect of his game has been severely neglected, especially when you consider the role Memphis has envisioned for him in their offense. However, despite the overarching narrative of this video, Jackson Jr.'s shot creation and inside game has seemed to trend upwards through his time in the league. And with the return of Ja, paired with a few off-season shakeups, who knows where Memphis could be a year from now. So for any Grizzlies fans out there, I understand that it's a rough period, but there's no telling what a healthy 82 games could do for your team. But with all that being said, that's gonna do it for this one. Hopefully you enjoyed, and hopefully I can catch you in the next one.